This is the Business Breakfast on Dubai Eye on One, on the UAE's #1 talk radio station.
Our next guest says this is the most important week of the summer for the markets. We'll hear from him shortly. First up, though, it is Federal Reserve meeting today. They meet today. The decision comes tomorrow. Let's have a listen to Jay Powell. This is him speaking a couple of weeks ago.
Is there a risk that we would go too far? Certainly there's a risk. But I wouldn't agree that it's the biggest risk to the economy. I think that, the bigger mistake to make, let's put it that way, would be to fail to restore price stability. A low inflation environment or regime is what we've had. And that is one in which inflation is low and no one pays any attention to inflation. And that's called rational inattention because it doesn't matter.
Keith Fitz-Gerald is the principal of the Fitz-Gerald Group in the United States. He joins us now live on Microsoft Teams. Morning, Keith.
Hello there. Thanks for having me back. Appreciate it.
Good to have you with us. You say it's the most important week of the summer, but not because of the Fed. You're more focused on earnings this week.
Well, I am, because here's the thing, right? The Fed has gone so far off the plot that it's ludicrous to expect it to be on the plot. So all respects to Chairman Powell. He's a brilliant guy. He's in command of the Fed. But the more important thing to watch is going to be what CEOs say about earnings. And what we saw from Walmart here just a little while ago is a great example of what I'm talking about. The company guided lower, but not because of everything. Same store sales are going to be up. They just had the wrong inventory on hand. So, it's what the CEOs say. It's how they're feeling about the economy. It's what they're looking for in their own numbers that is really going to set the tone for the markets for the next 3 to 6 months.
So 175 companies coming out this week with earnings, which is extraordinary. Which are the biggies? Which are the bellwethers that you'll be looking at?
Well, I think there's a couple. I think that clearly you've got big tech. And, and this is interesting because here in the United States, investors are making a fundamental mistake. They're grouping all tech together. That's not the case. Companies like Microsoft and Apple, for example, are very different from lesser players like Peloton or some of the other no-name tech companies. You've got companies like Chevron, for example, coming forward. So these are big companies making things that the world cannot live without. That's why I'm so intently focused on what the executives had to say about where their companies go next.
This is interesting, and I'm following you on Twitter, and your pinned tweet is believing in a concentrated portfolio of companies making products and services, to repeat that phrase of yours, the world cannot live without. So which companies do you put in that bracket, Keith?
Well, again, this is going to be common sense. This is companies that make the medical technology we cannot be without. This is companies that produce fuel we cannot live without, technology that we cannot live without. So companies like Chevron, for example, which everybody says is big oil, big energy, the world won't function without dinosaur juice. That's just the way it is. The world will use more of it in the years ahead, contrary to what the green side happens to think here in the United States and in many first-tier industrial companies. Companies like Apple and Microsoft make technology. People are changing the way they buy things. They're changing the way they shop, as evident by Walmart. But I haven't heard one person yet that's giving up their iPhone, turning in their Microsoft Word license. These are companies that can protect margins and at the click of a button add billions of dollars to the top line. A company like Pfizer is another great choice. Love it or not, vaccine or not, what they're doing is on the verge of customizable medicine. The world cannot live without that going forward. So those are the kinds of things that I'm talking about when it says must-have. Companies that are nice to have, which are ones you don't want to own, are going to be like Peloton, for example. I hate to keep picking on these companies, but, an iPad on an exercise bike is not a fundamental necessity to live. So that's a very different thought process, and I submit a very different investment.
What about outside the United States, Keith? If you look at emerging markets, is there anything that you see there that attracts you?
Oh, absolutely. Your part of the world, for example, is going to come on strong within the next 5 to 10 years. South America, parts of that are the same thing because, if we look at the economic window, and that's defined as the combination of workforce, available capital, and technology, even parts of Africa are going to be the next step. Time is sort of a cycle in my way of looking. And if we study history very carefully, and I mean thousands of years of history, it may not repeat itself, but it rhymes. And so to me, I'm already beginning to look at those regions because just like we've had these great runs in Europe, we've had these great runs in the United States, and even in Asia, the dollar will eventually pass and will be supplanted by something else. When, I don't know, but those steps, those building blocks are already being put in place today.
And how do you play those markets, Keith, or even markets here in the Middle East? Because if you're talking about those US companies, they're researched to death, aren't they? There's so much information out there on the companies you mentioned, the Microsofts, the Apples, the Chevrons, and so on. But if you're looking at, well, I like the demographics in Nigeria over the next 30 to 40 years, maybe it's harder sitting where you're in California, yeah, Keith? Am I right?
Well, we're actually north of Seattle. According to my wife, I live on another planet, but, we'll hold that for another time.
But you're on the west coast of the United States.
The west coast.
It's hard, the point I'm making, it's harder for you to pick champions in Nigeria or Saudi Arabia than it is to pick champions in the United States. Am I right? So do you just buy index trackers? How do you play these markets?
Well, that's an interesting question, and certainly COVID changed that part of my world. Prior to COVID, I would regularly travel 125, 150,000 miles a year, going to parts of the world because I believe boots on the ground are how you spot the next champions. You talk to leaders, you talk to business people, you get a real sense of who's on the street. One of the things I like to do is ride my motorcycles around the world because that puts me in touch with people on a level that you can't get sitting in an ivory tower somewhere on Wall Street or even in Seattle. So, I'm looking forward as the world reopens and returns to normal to resuming that schedule and getting out and meeting more of these people and seeing all those great things. But for now, I'm fortunate. I've got 40 years of contacts and firsthand knowledge that I can build up and draw upon. It makes it a little tougher, but not impossible.
Keith, always great talking to you. Love following you on Twitter, not just for your economic analysis, but for your motorbike journey. It's 300 kilometers to get a burger, is it, Keith?
Oh, yeah, in a heartbeat, especially if it's a great shop and a great burger and my wife's coming with me. It'd be awesome.
I love following you guys on Twitter. Sailing as well and climbing in the snow-capped mountains. We'll let you go, Keith. It's late where you are on the west coast of the United States. Really appreciate your time this morning. That is the voice of Keith Fitz-Gerald. He's a principal with Fitz-Gerald Group. He says this is the most important week for investors in the United States, but not because of the Fed meeting, which starts today. It's all about the earnings, so we will keep an eye on those.
Hi, it's Keith here. Thanks for checking out today's highlight clip. What'd you think? Did I make sense? Is there something you'd like to add? Make sure you leave a comment down below and, of course, click subscribe to keep up right here on YouTube or sign up for the email newsletter at the link below. You can also find me on Twitter and Instagram for my real-time thoughts on markets, analysis, and a whole lot more.